Hello, writers, and welcome to Writing for Screens. Today's episode, What Breeds Creativity? Limitations or Freedom? My name is Glenn Gers, and I am the Chief Operating Everything at Writing for Screens, a channel in which I have taken the skills and tools and insights that I had to figure out for myself in a 25-year career writing for TV and movies. On my way out of the business, I am trying to leave behind some of these things for you so that you don't have to do them yourself. You can try and take them, try them out for yourself, see if they work. There is no plan, there are no rules, there is no right or wrong way to be a writer. You have to figure it out for yourself. Every writer must make their own path based on who you are and what you like and what you want to do and what you can do. All of those things only you can figure out. So all I can do is drop some skills, tools, insights, things I've experienced, things I've tried, so that you can try them for yourself and see if they work for you. That's the whole deal. In order to do that, I have created on my channel, this is a little screen grab of the main page, and if you look down at the bottom, you will see that there are some playlists with nice, bright, colorful thumbnails. Here's a close-up of the first three. The first three playlists, as you scroll down, are Screenwriting Essentials, Screenwriting Tools, Skills, and Craft, and The Process, Being a Writer. Those three playlists together comprise about 50 10-minute videos. Each one of those videos is on a topic. The topic is the title. It is also the thumbnail, great big colorful letters so that you can say dialogue, genre, character, whatever it is that you're interested in. I gave you 10 minutes of things to think about, things to try, things I learned, and you can try them for yourself and see what you think. That is the name of the game here. Those are there 24/7 for free for you. Basically everything I know that I can communicate, I tried to communicate there. But having done that, I have been live streaming every Wednesday, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, if I can make it. And I take on a different topic every week. This week's topic is going to be about limitations and freedom and what that does to your creativity. First, a couple of hellos, and then we'll get right into it. Hello, Pelicans, and damn you all, and Akari. Hello, Dogo Productions. Nice to meet you. And hello, Thomas Lewis. Okay, so here's the deal. Here's the topic. Here's what's going on. The question was asked last week, actually. I was doing an in-depth analysis of a script of mine, which I had posted. Please look at last week's live stream for that. But during it, someone asked me, what breeds creativity? Limitations or freedom? That was the basic question, and I said I'll answer that next week. Here we are. And the first thing I want to talk about is this concept of freedom, which currently is kind of defined as defiance or breaking an existing cultural rule or limit. Freedom is defying those limits, especially since the end of the 19th century. It's the entire arc of the 20th century culturally. The arc of modernity, of modernism, was about breaking rules, about changing or testing limits, about formal experiments, and also talking about taboo topics. And those were the driving artistic instincts for most of the 20th century, for most art forms. So we've got this idea that freedom means breaking the rules. But what's happened now is it's been like 150 years of that. And basically there's no rules left, no serious rules artistically. And so the question sort of becomes, what happens when the revolution wins? When the revolution is successful, what do we do when taboo breaking has become more or less routine, when novelty or change or something that seems wildly different or antagonistic to the status quo is kind of required, so that it becomes compulsive or empty. That's my problem with this concept of freedom. in terms of art. Because we're essentially, I believe, in a sort of a post-freedom moment. In many ways, we are at the least regulated artistic moment possibly in the history of art, of people. Because of technology changing, there are less gatekeepers. There are less. It used to be that if you wanted to put an article out there, you had to find a magazine or a newspaper that would publish it. If you wanted to put a TV show out there, you had to find a network that would put it on. It was very difficult, technically, physically, to get material out there. So there were these bottlenecks, these gatekeepers, who were defined as essentially the establishment, the academy, the rules, the culture. Well, in the 21st century, that has really broken down. There are very few authorities, artistically speaking, certainly very few unchallenged authorities, and there is more access to production and distribution of creative work than there. Anybody can do it, more or less. And there are many, many different audiences. It used to be that the cultural gatekeepers were pointing towards a specific audience group. And therefore anyone else who was outside of that group was just not important. They weren't, and that pissed off a lot of people. So they formed their own cultures and their own categories of work. And now there are so many different audiences. There are so many different markets. There are so many different cultures, essentially. So there's nothing to rebel against in that sense. You can find a group who will probably agree with every possible point of view. But in many other ways, we are at the most restrictive, partly because your ability to communicate across groups or into the wider group is almost impossible. It is impossible to get the attention. It is impossible to get to break through the mass, the cloud, the flow of stuff. But also any particular group is pretty severely limited. There are things you can or cannot say in any community or group right now. And infractions are pretty not tolerated. So that's what my impression of the cultural moment, which makes the concept of freedom kind of bizarre. It's very hard to understand what freedom means when you can do whatever you want. You can write whatever you want and put it out, and no one can stop you. Within legal limits, which are pretty loose and flexible at the moment, at least here in the USA. So I think one of the first things we want to do is talk about creative freedom and cultural or social freedom, because they're different. And I believe it is really important not to confuse social or cultural freedom with creative freedom. That is really, really my first point, is when you're thinking about freedom, think about freedom from what? What's stopping you? You may feel that a group that you are in communication with doesn't want to hear or has a rule, the 3-act rule, for instance, or the happy ending rule, or the big audience rule. Those are rules of the business of entertainment right now. They're not actual rules. You can do whatever you want if you don't mind not making as much money as perhaps, the latest Marvel movie might. On the other hand, you don't have to go through as many compromises as you might to get a Marvel movie made, if you even could. So I guess my point is, let's forget about cultural and social freedom. It's beyond the scope of this conversation. This conversation is about creative freedom. And that's where I think you get into an interesting thing, because without those bounds of an establishment, you're pretty free, but you are limited by your reality. The real limit creatively is reality. And one of the biggest limits that reality is imposing upon you is form. There is no content. There is no such thing as an artwork without a form. And form itself is a limit. What do I mean by that? A book can only be so many pages. A screen can only take in what is within the frame. Those are like the most severe immediate limits. But then within that, there's many, many other limits which you will run into in terms of limits of technology, limits of money, limits of audience expectations. There's many, many formal limits. Like if you make an 8-hour movie, it's going to be very hard for people to sit through. If you break it up into 8-hour-long episodes, you got a better shot. But the point is that's a formal limit. It is a formal restriction. You can break free of that. You can make the 8-hour movie now technically, physically. However, you are going to then be making a choice to say, I am willing to only appeal to an audience who will sit still for 8 hours. Every single art form, and I really have to say this again, is a limit. Every piece of art has formal existing limits, plus the formal limits that you are going to present to yourself by the choices you make. Every single choice you make sets a limit. If you say, I'm telling the story of this character, then you are limiting your story to that character's actions and the repercussions of it, and you are not telling in another entirely different story. So you are limiting, you are closing off options. That's what art is. Art is making choices, and those choices create limits. So therefore, I think the most important thing that you can do when you consider that you are choosing, oh, sorry, wrong one. I believe you have to learn to love your limits, love the frame, love the chapter, love the sentence, learn to love your form, learn to love if you're working in pen and ink, or you're working in paint, or you're working in synthesized music, or you're working in a play on a stage. You have to learn the limits. You have to learn the reality of that form, that art form. And within that art form, you got to love it. You got to say, ooh, what can I do with those limits? How can I use those limits? People use the frame of a movie to create the story, to create mood. The things you can and can't see are defined by the frame. Likewise, the sentence, by choosing which sentence and how long your sentence is going to be and what the sentence is going to be about, you are setting limits upon yourself and using that to steer the audience's mind. So you really should learn what sets the limits of your form and of your chosen genre and of your chosen style. Those are all limits. If you are working in a free-form stream of consciousness artwork, you are going to have different kinds of formal pressures than if you're working on a third person, I'm telling a formal Hollywood story, and what they are thinking, it doesn't matter, it's what they are doing. Those are limits. Those are creative limits. And that's what I want to talk about here when we talk about this question of what breeds creativity. Limits definitely do. However, within that, in other words, learning to love them, it's easy to use the form, use the choices you're making about the type of story you want to tell. If you are telling a tragedy, it's going to be very different than if you're telling a comedy. And it's very important to say, within that form, I gotta love it. I gotta use it. I gotta have fun with it. But then within that, the idea of freedom really comes down to choosing your own limits. If you are deciding, I'm going to tell this story in the first person, or I'm going to tell this story in the third person, you are choosing to restrict your freedom in one way or another. If you do the third person, you have to decide how you're going to get inside somebody's mind. If you do the first person, how are you going to get out of their mind? Those are limits. They are formal realities. And if you choose them, that freedom to choose your own limits, to choose your own rules, to decide what your goal is, that's creative freedom. Lack of creative freedom is when you say, I want to sell a movie to Hollywood, so I have to follow these rules, unspoken rules of Hollywood, which are the 3-act structure, the hero, the single central character, the generally happy ending, the general statement of the theme. There's a lot of rules which tons of books will tell you about, and every one will be different, and you know my feelings about that. Rules are tools. Limits are tools. There is no such thing as freedom in the sense that yes, you can do whatever you want, but you still have to make choices. And that setting of your own choices is freedom. Setting your own limits, that is creative freedom, in my opinion. That's my basic take on this question. Is there such a thing as creative freedom? Certainly, if you are talking about the limits imposed by a business or a certain cultural group, if you have, some very, like the people who run MFA programs for novels may have certain beliefs about what a good novel is or whatever, and you may decide, you know what, I'm not going to do that, and that's cool. You are defying that culture, but there's no punishment for that. You're excluded from that group. But currently we are living, as I said, in this post-rule time when there's other groups, if you want to choose them, and there's other ways to work. So I don't really see a lot of limits on your creative freedom. I do see a recognition that there is no such thing as creative freedom beyond the formal choices you must make. Because you must. You have... When you choose a word, when you choose a sentence, you are setting a limit. You are setting a style. You are setting a plan, which you can then break. You could have 5 different styles in one work, and that would be but you're not defying anybody. You're simply saying, I'm going to challenge the reader who is expecting certain things. You are free of their expectations, but you are actually just setting your own plan and limits. Those are my basic takes on this issue. My basic take is, if you are feeling like you don't have creative freedom, think about why. In other words, what allegiance, what decision have you made to join what set of rules? And is it worth it to do that if it's imposing limits on your freedom that you need to break free of? But I honestly don't see that there are such a thing as a lot of creative limits in the current world we are in. You can do basically anything you want. People in the past, in the 20th century, they broke so many boundaries that there's nothing left, which may mean we're in a wasteland. There's the famous quote from Robert Frost, I believe, the poet, who said that he felt that working with what they called free verse, no rhyme, no structure, was like playing tennis without a net. Which is interesting. I think that there's arguments both ways. I don't think you need rhyme to do poetry, but I also do think you do have to recognize the form. And that form creates limits, even if it's a long Walt Whitman-esque poetry line with lots of different kinds of rhythms. That's still its own net, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, let's see what the comments are here. Okay, hello, Troy. Good evening to you. Nice to meet you. Hello, Butte and Michael. Andrew Escalante says, collapsing economy. I'm not sure what that's in reference to, but true. I assume it's one of the limits that we might face. Hello, Bastien. Yeah, we are all here live. Yay. Shame your preferred hour is a bit late for me. In Italy. Oh, man, how cool. I love Italy. But I'm glad you didn't require live attendance. He goes, no, of course. The odds that anyone can be here live are infinitesimal. They're teeny tiny. The idea that somebody could take their time. If you're here in America, you are probably at work or this is your lunch hour at best. And then when you get into other countries and continents, the time is all messed up. So I apologize, but we exist in time. That's our limit. The reality is I am in a time zone. This one is my time zone. It is my friend. Okay. Hello, Timothy and the amazing viewers. Indeed, nice to meet you. In Citizen Kane has asked what people would think. He responds, what I tell them to think. That's true. That is, he is certainly pointing out he will not allow limits on himself. Hello, Wolf Powers. Bastian says, it would be fascinating to talk about our own psychological limitations, the fear of writing, procrastination, and so on. But then again, small steps are great tools. Thank you. Yes, no, there certainly are. I was talking about formal creative limits. There's limits of the art form. We also do have personal limits. We have things that we are uncomfortable about talking about. We also have things we just don't care about. That's a limit. Like, I don't care about certain things enough to do art about them. So that's a limit. If I cross into that, if somebody says, hey, do, something about this, I'm like, it's just not worth my time. I don't care. That's a limit. Plus, of course, fear. I'm afraid to talk about that. I'm afraid that I don't know enough about that. I'm afraid that people will judge me. Those are all other limits. Absolutely a whole second layer, a whole second set of limits. But to recognize that that's a personal battle in which you have to choose to either love your limit and work within it, or defy your limit and create a new set of circumstances. Thomas says, Glenn is so right. Thank you. The limitations are what make things understandable to the reader and viewer and reduce the job to something doable. Exactly. You got to love the limits. If you don't have like when I'm working on a novel now, right? And that novel has become easier since I've got it down to a certain number of chapters. It's like that. I now know the outline and I know what's going to happen and I know how many chapters it will be. And so a part of me is like, what a relief, because now I know that if I can just do one chapter, 4-page chapter, I will have reduced my things to do list, my task, my mission, by 1/80th of the number of chapters. And that therefore each one, I can say, just work within that limit. Just get this one scene down. That is when I say learn to love the limits. I really mean that. You will be surprised how lovable those limits are when you don't feel like they are imposed against your creativity. When you think of them, when you make sure, like, if sometimes they are, like if there's a limit to the type of noise that will be allowed on a radio station and you want to write a song that's all that noise, that's a frustrating limit, but it also could be a question of what people can stand to listen to. Okay. Hello, Mark Burton. My environment breeds my creativity and my lack of IT skills limits my progress. Giving up is my freedom. Yes, exactly. Thank you. I am well. I am doing okay. And yes, we are all constantly, it's just really important to recognize which limits are making it hard for you and which limits are actually making it easier, because there's a lot of limits that make things easier for you as an artist. And you need to love those. The ones that you feel are restricting you or preventing you from doing what you could do, you have to think, what's the cost of defying that limit? Is it even possible to defy that limit? Okay. Hi, Matthew. Oh, the other thing, like for instance, the frame, like currently I am in a frame right now. You are seeing me in a little rectangular box. Okay. And for the most of screen history, that has been the defining feature of that's the first limit. You're in a frame. Everything you do in the story is supposed to be in the frame. Now with virtual reality, in theory, the frame is broken. There is no frame. And that presents a lot of interesting creative problems, actually, because how do you focus the eye? How do you create a composition in a world with no frame? I believe that's going to be a big question and challenge and interesting issue about virtual reality art, which surely is on its way. Right now it's just toys, but it will increasingly and quickly become an art form. Okay. In England, Mark Burton says, we have free speech as long as you're not detrimentally talking about the failings of... and I assume that means the failings of some authority. Hello, bearded screenwriter. Michael says, I think the Greeks believed out of chaos you find order. I think that may be true. I'm not sure if I'm not sure. I think that I'm not enough of an expert on Greek philosophy, but I do believe that that they may have said that you make order to deal with chaos, but I don't really know. But you certainly have to recognize the difference this is my point, the difference between chaos and order. And for a long time, the desire to break a repressive order meant that chaos seemed like the solution. Chaos isn't really a good artistic solution most of the time. I can understand the aesthetic of chaos, the desire for chaos, but it's weird because I believe most chaos art is still working within an order, and it's trying to essentially put chaos into a form, which is kind of a lie. Real chaos, which I believe we may have accidentally gotten. We may have accidentally broken so many repressive orders that we have created a landscape of chaos. And I'm not sure that that's a good thing. Hello, Light and Forms. A few live streams ago, you briefly mentioned you don't care much for Jurassic Park. Can you develop? That movie is monumentally informative for me. Have yet to read the novel out of fear. Okay, interesting. Let me get to that in a minute. Thank you, Light and Forms. Fascinating question. I don't like to do too much specific critiquing of things, but that's a fair question. Okay. Hello, Steed, and she breathes in gold. So nice to see you too. Light and Form says, back to the topic. It's a shame that fear itself, which is intrinsically limiting, doesn't inspire any freedom, or I've yet to learn that trick at least. This is interesting. I do hope that you look at my. I've got a video called Fear of Writing, where I talk about my experience of that fear. I will put a link to that down in the description of this after this episode is done recording. Here's the thing about fear, just my quick take on this. I actually believe that it can be intrinsically limiting. Your fear makes you not do things. One of the things I believe is best to do when you're facing a limiting fear is to say, A, what's the worst that can happen? Because truly, most of the worst that can happen has already happened. Like you'll say, like, I want to write something and I want it to become a big hit. Well, currently you have no big hit. So if you write it and it's not a big hit, you haven't actually lost anything. All you've lost was the imaginary promise of this thing, but you never had it. So therefore, my take on fear is most creative fear is fear of an imaginary thing not happening. That in fact, it just puts you where you are. And the more that you can just say, well, I'm here. You know, I'm legitimate as I am. I did a thing. That's better than not doing a thing. The other thing to remember about fear is not doing something will never resolve the fear. In other words, you will not be able to get rid of some fear by not doing something. You won't. You'll just be hiding, and that thing will never get done. Hi, Hasko. Black don't crack, or Black don't crack. Hello to Chicago. Thanks for your streams. I was able to learn, and as of the other day, finish my screenplay. Yay! Congratulations. Wait, let's just... Cool. Bravo. Thank you. I'm so glad that I helped. A martial arts sci horror. This community is cool, and I am keeping it going, and that is so great. And frankly, a martial arts psychological horror film sounds great. I am in. That's wonderful. Okay. And now further to that is I don't know what to do with the script next, though. I'm not in the industry, just a school teacher decided to go for it and write it at 40 years old. A-okay, good. I can tell you what I suggest doing for it. I suggest not doing too many contests, but if you are going to do a contest, do one of the ones which doesn't promise industry in. Like there are certain, there aren't that many contests that I think are worthwhile. I think the Blacklist is probably worth doing. I like Cinestory, the Nickel. There are certain contests, but I would suggest festivals. What you should do with your script is submit it. There's many film festivals that have contests for screenplays. The point about that is that you're not dealing with most contests now are being run by a single company for that company's profit. And those are the ones you want to avoid. If there is a contest run by a foundation, by a non-profit, do that. If there is a contest run by a film festival, do that. And if possible, get involved in it online or physically go to it if at all possible, because that's really the point of all this. But the main thing is try and get it out there. Get it out there in any way you can, but avoid for-profit companies that run contests exclusively through their company. They are usually ripoffs. Okay, so let's see. Michael says, did your agent discourage you from breaking the rules? No, I had an incredibly supportive agent who would always say, oh my God, what am I going to do with this when I did something that broke the rules? But she always said, let's find the place where this belongs. So I was very lucky in that way. There were later producers, executives, and representatives who were more discouraging of breaking the rules. They weren't wrong because they were business advisors. They were not creative advisors. They were not trying to help me be the best artist I could. They were trying to help me sell to a market. And that market had goals, rules. So I don't just, it's like if you're trying to sell work to a specific market and you're saying, screw their rules, you're kind of wasting your time. If you are trying to get into a certain market, do what that market wants. That's the game. If you don't want to do that, don't go to that market. Don't try and sell to that group. That's my take on that. Wolf Powers says, my fear right now is that I'm not going to get my novel finished because some other crazy thing happens in my life that keeps me from finishing it. This fear is pushing me to work faster, but I still feel like I'm stuck in mud. Me too, for mine. I have the same feeling. I understand it. What I can say is, once again, the biggest thing I can say about this that I would suggest is learn to love your limits. Use your limits. If your book is taking a long time, think about what limits are. How many chapters, how many words, how many pages, how many things are going to happen in it? Is there any way to make them simpler, shorter, less? Is there any that you can do, a short version of, et cetera, et cetera? Try and find if there's a way to move faster by simplifying or making a limited version, which you can always expand later when you get it done. That's my take. Also, just, step by step, if you keep working, but there's no way to control what will happen in our lives. There is no way to control outside things that happen to us. So one thing is, if you feel that fear that I'm taking on something that's so big that I'm not going to be able to get it done before stuff happens, try to choose projects that are a little smaller. Ideally, maybe there's projects you could do in pieces so you get small bits done. And if that one gets done, you can do the next bit, and they're self-contained works within a larger goal. Something to think about when you're trying to do something and you feel like you never know what's coming, because we don't ever know what's coming. Light and Form says, that's a very uplifting framing of fear. Thank you. I'm very glad. And yes, way to go, Black Don't Crack. Nice. Thank you. And Shul, I'm wearing my green screen shirt. Okay. Going back to order versus chaos, Bastian says, how does that relate to the characters in your novel? Does the struggling artist fight against artistic or internal limits? Yes. Maybe they are intertwined. Yes. Let me get to that in a bit. I have another question to get to, and I also have another topic that I want to get to. But first, She Breathes in Gold says, speaking of creative limits, I usually find Act 1 and Act 2A a lot easier to write than Act 2B and 3. Once I reach the midpoint, the story narrows and the pressure to align everything mounts. That's interesting. I often find that it's easier to write the second half because of the narrowing, because I have less possibilities. So I can just say, well, I got to do this because this is what's going to happen. Like, I know we got to get to the racetrack now. I know we got to get to the bank vault. So this, dinner scene I was planning, it's just not going to happen. So for me, it feels kind of like a relief when I get to the second half. However, I do understand that. And that was a 1 of 2. So I'm going to talk about, find the other half. I'm curious how you keep yourself feeling creatively free past the midpoint. Well, that's what it is. Closer to the end, when you're now in the area of inevitable, or instead of the anything is possible. I will tell you, for me, anything is possible is a lot of fun, but eventually and inevitably for me, anything is possible is frustrating and frightening because I have too many things. I go in too many directions. So for me, the limits, the form, the choices are what actually allow me to get out of the swamp that I inevitably get into for anything is possible. That is the hardest thing for me to say, well, I guess this is it. But once I do, it becomes fun. Like I am currently working on the manufacture of the book version of these writing classes. And I've hit the point where I've written it all, I've edited it all, I've spent months and months getting it into a form. It is now in the final manuscript form. And I'm looking at it, and there's a lot of things I want to talk about that I'm like, oh, I didn't say that, or oh, I didn't say that. Putting them in a new project because this one is inevitable. This one is heading towards its third act. And you know what? That's kind of fun. It's also kind of like, well, oh, well, you know, I'll be better next time. That's what I often think is like, at least this is going to get done. And for me, the biggest fear, the biggest failure is the number of things I have not finished. So therefore, the idea that I could narrow down to a point of finishing, even if that's limited and not good enough, or removing all these possibilities, it's still so exciting to me to say, look, it's a thing, it's done, it's got its limits, it's got its beginning, middle, and end, and now can I make those good? To me, that's the thing, is I say, okay, yes, I am stuck now doing this inevitable scene. How can I make that cool? How can I make that fun or exciting or scary or whatever it is that's supposed to be? That's where I get to with that. Okay, and David Rose says, this is awesome and informative. That's cool. Thank you so much. You wrote many good and bankable screenplays. How did you handle the rejection? It would take me a while to get over it. To me, the thing that helped me get over it is I was always thinking about the next one. So therefore, by the time something was rejected, I was like, all right, fine, I'll do this one instead. And what's interesting now, as I hit the end of the line where I'm not going to have that many next ones, just chronologically speaking, there's only so much time left for me to do things. I am finding that's actually feeling a little like the third act. It's like, well, all I'm going to get is this writing book and this painting novel, and then a novel after that. If I get that, plus these things and my Substack, that's all I'm going to do. So let me make those work. It's kind of liberating. This is why I think that actually limits are liberating, because then you say, how can I do that narrow, pathetic thing well? How can I make this pathetic failure of a thing that's nowhere near as big as the thing I thought it was going to be? How can I make it rock? How can I make it kick? How can I make it feel? How can I get an idea across? Anyway, let me go back, because there were a couple of things that, first of all, I want to get into my other topic very briefly, because I got a question in an email, which basically came down to, is it ethical to use someone else's story idea? And ethical is the key question here, because this is also a legal issue. And I want to point out, I cannot and do not give legal advice. All right. If you are taking my advice or something, do not assume that means that there is a legal justification for what I say or what I do. I am giving you the best that I know of, which is, aside from the ethical question of this is about a writer who wrote to me and said, hey, I read this book and there was this part of it, this character who was so fascinating to me, but this writer took them in a whole other direction. And I was thinking, what if I took them and went in the direction I want to go? And the question was, is that ethical to do? Is it legal to do? And the answer was, in order to take that issue, you need to, first of all, recognize that, and this is very important, if you are reading somebody's book or watching somebody's movie, that is copyrighted. That is their property. That is their intellectual property. It is illegal to take it and rewrite it for yourself. You cannot do that. But you cannot copyright an idea, okay? You can only copyright the expression of that idea. In other words, the novel in which this character appears is copyright. And the details and the words that are used and the form, all of that is someone else's property and you cannot use it. However, the essence of it, for instance, in this case, character was a billionaire, an elderly billionaire who finds their old love. Now, there were a lot of details about this involving private detectives and stuff. And I said, well, here's the thing. What you really want to do is think about what part of that inspired you, excited you. What is the essence of it that got to you? Find the essence of the thing that inspires you and make your version of it different, very different. In other words, talking about an elderly billionaire who uses private detectives to find their old love. Well, was it the private detectives that made them interested? No. They said that they were moved by the idea of this elderly person finding their old love. And he said, well, can I still, make the billionaire? And I was like, why? What is the importance of the billionaire? It's not. The question is a person who appears to be in some way successful or complete and elderly. That doesn't have to be a billionaire. That could be a person who owns a candy shop and is retiring. It could be, who says they have to be rich for this story to work? Certainly no detective. So if you start to strip it down, you're talking about a character who is at the end of their life and they are thinking about or reintroduced to or seeking out their first love. That is an idea. That is not a copyrightable thing. There are many, many possible versions of that. So while you can copyright the billionaire who has a detective find his old love, you cannot say, oh, an old person who is thinking about their old love and reconnects with them. First of all, there's a bunch of those. And your version, think about what would make yours distinctly your own. Don't use theirs. Use the essence of theirs, the thing that inspired you, and then ask questions. Who are they? What would they do in my version? Let's say we are ruling out the things that I read. We are ruling out billionaires. We're ruling out detectives. That still leaves, could be a fisherman, could be a baker, could be a lawyer. Choose which one works for you. Make your version. That is the essence. Be creative. You can be inspired by someone else's work. Much of my work was me, like I wrote this movie which was about essentially 3 Days of the Condor or North by Northwest, both stories in which an innocent person is dragged into an intrigue, okay? 3 Days of the Condor and North by Northwest are extremely different, but they both have that same essential principle. So that's what I'm saying is look for the essence. The essence is the person who is innocent. In the case of 3 Days of the Condor, this is not a spoiler, they are working in the CIA, but they are innocent. They do not know the machinations that are going to cause them to get dragged into this very violent, scary situation. So even though they are a CIA person, they are essentially innocent. They are essentially naive. And then they get dragged into this thing that they don't even understand. In North by Northwest is a guy who just literally is in the wrong place in the wrong time and becomes dragged into this espionage murder thing. I took my own version of that. You would never know that it was based on those things, but I was inspired by that feeling, that idea. Okay. So that's what I have to say about that. Now let's get back to the comments and then the questions that I had to dump. Okay. Anshul says, bro, sir, that's me. When I am reaching the end of this script, I have been writing for about 18 years. It's inspired from something that happened to one relationship all my life, but something that happened in 2007. The question is now suddenly I am questioning every scene. How do I deal with it as a writer? Cool question. Okay, the answer that comes to mind right away is, and this is interesting because it's sort of the same thing. It's learn to love your limits. Use your limits. You've made certain choices, Anshul. You've said, I'm going to tell this story. Now I'm questioning everything. Well, is there anything you like? If you're questioning everything, if everything seems bad, take a note of that because that means it's not real. Okay? Everything couldn't suddenly be bad. Some things should be bad, some things should be good. That's life. The question is, what parts of it do you really like? First of all, hang on to those. The second thing you need to do is say, are the feelings that are making me question these decisions based on what you fear someone will think? Screw that. Do what you think. That's all you can do. You can only do the best you can according to what you think is good or bad. If those questions or fears are based on you suddenly are thinking, oh, well, it should be more like this, don't change the essential plan of a project. Do a new project. Finish the one you have according to its own rules, according to its own goals, and then say, oh, I'm writing this thing and it's not very scary because it's a drama, but I really think it should be, I think people want it to be scary. Write a scary thing after. If the thing is a drama or a comedy, make it what it is and don't worry that it is not something else. That's life. That is the reality is everything has limits. Everything is a choice. Making art is making choices. And once you have made some choices, stick with them, live with them. Decide which ones you love and stay there. It could be just two. It could be like, I like this scene and I like that line. Whatever it is, say, those choices are made. I like the ending. I like the beginning. I like this moment. Okay, say now that moment, in order to have that moment, you're going to have this character and they're going to have to be in this situation. Those are now locked in. They're chosen. You're not going to change them. The question is, can you do them as well as possible? Sure. And at a certain point, you're like, well, that's the best thing. I think it's good. If you think it's good, you're done. Finish it and move on. Okay. Oh, fanfic. Yes. Okay. I did want to talk about that. Okay. Fan fiction. When I talk about using someone else's copyright material, there is a thing. It is an established creative art now called fan fiction, in which you are taking someone else's copyrighted material, specific characters with specific names from specific stories, and you are saying that exists, but I am doing my variation on it. I'm doing my version of it. I'm doing my extension of that. Here's the thing. When you choose to do fan fiction, you are choosing to work in a specific art form which has its limits and rules and goals. The thing that you have to recognize is that A, you are probably never going to be able to do anything with it except put it on the internet. And even then, you may get it taken down. There are plenty of people who have had their fan fiction taken down if you get some aggressive company that owns that property. So just be prepared for the fact that when you fan fiction, you are making it possible that your work will not be seen, ever. That is possible, and don't do fan fiction if you're not ready to live with that. The other thing is that if you're working within fan fiction, it has its own rules. It has its own goals. So what I would say is, if you are doing fan fiction, I'm not talking about fan fiction. I am talking about writing original work. And when you write original work, it is important that no matter what you're inspired by, you are not stealing. When you are doing fan fiction, it's a form of stealing. It's a form of theft which has a glorious vision behind it, and I don't actually mind it. But in terms of copyright, in terms of reaching an audience, you have to respect the fact that you are taking that chance. You are making that choice to do fan fiction, and that your fiction is dependent. In other words, you are writing a character, but that character already exists. And while you may decide to break canon or do whatever you want with your fan fiction, you are writing something that is dependent. It is a reflection of an existing thing. And as such, I think you need to deal with that. You need to take that seriously. You have to be responsible about it. Okay. I remember Bookwald versus Paramount opened a can of worms. So many names. Yeah, but that was a financial case. I don't think I'll have time to talk about that right now. Yes. Okay. Anshul says, I'm questioning is it brilliant or just my stupidity? I love what I've written. If you have loved what you are written, be done. Think about what that fear is really coming from. Think about what those questions are really coming from. Because if you love what you have written, you are done. Put it out. Get it. Show it to people. Copyright it and stamp a date on it and say, this exists. This is a finished thing and I am moving on. That is what you do when you love what you have written. Okay. You are welcome, Anshul. Others' ideas. I'm writing my own horror version of Peyton Place. It's set in South instead of New Hampshire. It's my own observations as an outsider and a crowd. Okay, cool. Yeah, so what you're talking about is Peyton Place as a formal idea, just like I took 3 Days of the Condor as a shape. But then by the time I got done with it, no one would say, oh, that's 3 Days of the Condor. They would say, oh, it's this guy who got caught up in spy stuff. If you are doing Peyton Place, what you're really saying is you are doing a soap opera, a community full of intrigue and romance and lust and power. Cool, do it. That's fine. That is the case of taking the essence of something and moving on from it. No more questions because I still have some old questions I got to answer. She Breathes in Gold says, my favorite thing to do when I get inspired by another person's work is to break down that work into its core elements and figure out what exactly is drawing me in. I'm always surprised by what it is. She Breathes in Gold has said exactly what I mean. Finding the essence, saying, what is it about this that I think is cool? What is it about this that I think is fun? For me, it was the comic scariness of that situation, the absurdity and yet the dramatic pressure. That just struck me as so great. Okay. Arkmish says, all that's been happening is I keep changing a story, a character or story events, and I'm not able to settle on one story. Can you please advise something? It's got me feeling repeatedly disappointed and low. Yes, I can. I can recommend to you 2 videos I made on that topic. The first one is called Instinct. Please watch that video. I will put a link to it in the description after we are done. The other one, I think, is Imagination. Where is it? Imagination. That's another one. And then I think probably Getting Stuck or Lost, because it sounds like you are getting stuck or lost. Okay, so those 3 videos, they're in the playlist at the main channel. Getting Stuck or Lost, Instinct, and Imagination. I think those will help Arkmish. Also, really, the whole process here. There's 3 playlists at the beginning of my channel page. The bottom one that you see here on this screen grab is called The Process, Being a Writer. I would really urge you to look at that. Those are all on that topic about facing the endless taking it back. I know what that's like. I also did... let me talk about this one. I mentioned it before. Fear of writing. Arkmish, it sounds like you're scared. It sounds like you keep changing because you are scared. And that video that I just mentioned and the Getting Stuck and Lost, those talk about what to do to get around that fear, to get through that fear. Yes, the tall blonde man with one black shoe. Absolutely. I love that. I love the French version a lot. The American version is okay. Anyway, that is, yes, Tall Blonde Man with One Black Shoe is a hilarious 1970s French comedy about the same concept of somebody who gets pulled into. Also, the Burn After Reading. The Coen Brothers, another great one. Okay, but let's talk about some other questions that were asked earlier. Let me see what we got here. Okay, sorry, I'm scanning back to some other questions. Okay, so Bastian was asking order versus chaos. Let me see if I can find it here. Okay, going back to order versus chaos. How does that relate to the characters in my novel? The answer is yes. The main character is actually learning order. He's lived a chaotic life until the story begins, and as he learns about art and society, he finds his place in the world and finds himself. But the painter is indeed constantly trying to break boundaries, and he's doing it, but he's never satisfied, which is exactly this thing we were talking about. So those the tragedy of not accepting a limit is embodied in the painter, but it's not the only thing going on in the story. The other question was, I want to make sure I get to Light and Form's question. I hope you're still here, Light and Forms. Asked, what was my problem with Jurassic Park? My problem with Jurassic, and partly this is because I like the book better, but the thing about Jurassic Park that I didn't love was that I felt very slow, and that it sort of the original story was much more technological and about the scientific moral questions. Those are lightly treated, but it was really the center of Jurassic Park. And it's like, it was a thriller in order to convey a technological debate about whether or not there are some scientific things that we should not do, even though we can. And that was the point of it. And it was a very powerful book in that way. Michael Crichton's a very smart writer, I believe. But what Spielberg did, he said, I want to tell the story about family. That is a very, very minor point of the book. And in doing that, they diminished the power of the Frankenstein story that was happening. They made it's like Frankenstein goes to Disneyland. And the original version of Frankenstein Disneyland was very powerful to me. And I felt like the Jurassic Park watered that down in favor of what seemed to be a popular movie genre, the E.T. genre, which Spielberg invented. So the fact that, and I do not mean to criticize the movie for those things. If that was monumentally formative for you, great. Everyone, it's not for me to say it's good or bad. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying for me, it was frustrating to see a lightened version, a sweetened version of Frankenstein, because to me the potential was for a really thought-provoking and frightening movie as opposed to a kind of sweet, fun movie. So those are the main things for me, is that I felt like it was slow, and that it was not as scary as it potentially could be. It was not as dark and not as about the mistake they were making. It clearly handles that mistake, but it handles it in rather such an obvious way to me that I wasn't challenged. Whereas the book Frankenstein, and I have big hopes for Guillermo del Toro's upcoming movie of Frankenstein. The thing about Frankenstein is how much it deals with the allure and the problems of human accomplishment. It's a very thought-provoking debate. It's a very anguished question about what humanity is. So to me, it just felt like Jurassic Park simplified in order to make fun. I don't mean make fun, I mean make it fun. So to me, but that's like I said, I'm not in any way saying it's a bad movie. It wasn't fun for me because I had other things I was looking for. Okay. Yeah, I think it's a great read, and it's the thing about Michael Crichton is he piles in the research. And I love that. I love reading something that's like making you think and giving you information at the same time that it's layering in a terrific story. Okay, so the other, were there other questions? I don't think, Michael said, Michael asked me, sorry, Michael, I'm getting to you. Okay, you wrote many good and bankable screenplays. How did you handle the rejection? Great question. As I said, the main way I handled it was just relentlessly thinking, I can fix this. I can do it better. I can do another one. Also, honestly, and this is what I preach, and I did practice it. I continue to practice it even more now, which is to say, I always now try to write things that even if they are rejected, I don't care because I think it's good. I think that's really important to not be so outer focused that you spend your time saying, what if they don't like it? What should I do to please them? That's icky. Most of us don't like that in another person. If you do like that in another person, you're probably, frankly, sort of taking advantage of them in order to feel safe that they need you so much. So what I would say is you don't want to be a person who is saying, I will do whatever they want. That's not a good artist. A good artist doesn't say, I will do whatever they want. They say, I will do what comes up here and see where that belongs. That is my advice. If you write something that you think is terrific, no matter how many people hate it, you win if you get it to where you like it. And you never know. Like when I wrote all those scripts, there was no internet. And there certainly were no live streams. And so now I can do the internet and I can do the live streams and I can put my scripts out there. And even though they were rejected by the movie companies, a handful of people will read them and maybe some will write me an email and say, damn, that was good. And that's the best. That is the point of art. That is the point of what you are doing, is do the stuff that you love no matter what happens to it, and find ways to get it out there as best you can, because an audience of 10 is far better than an audience of 0. And the fact that it's not 1 million doesn't really matter that much. Trust me on this, because I've had audiences of 10. So that is my advice. That is my vision. Moria, hello. Thank you for your black hearts. Okay. Got it. Thank you. Good. I'm glad. Have you ever written science fiction? Yes. Yes, I have. I did some sci-fi jobs, some sci-fi work. I did a sci-fi action thriller. There was a script that had been knocking around. It was based on a short story. The company Castle Rock hired me to do a draft. I was one of many writers who had done it. I loved my draft. Didn't get made. Oh well. But anyway, yeah, no, I like science fiction. And the thing about Frankenstein is that it's kind of science fiction, but also kind of horror. And the main thing about Frankenstein is that it's smart horror, that it's thoughtful horror. And I am a big fan of that. Speaking of which, just for what it's worth, anybody out there wants to do, I thought Eddington was terrific. And very much a comic horror, thought-provoking, intelligent script. And a fabulous movie. I think it's great. Eddington, if you get a chance. That you may not like it. Lots of people are troubled by it. I think it's terrific. Okay. Crichton's timeline made me travel to Sarlat in France, where it said, great tour guide. Yeah. Crichton, I think Crichton's an underrated novelist. I like him. Okay, so there you go. You are welcome. I am delighted to have seen you all. Please do, in about 10 minutes, I will post the links to the videos I mentioned in the description here. Until next week, then, let us say, I've blocked myself. There we go. All right. See you next week. And until then, please go write something.